Welcome to the Oasis Revival Ministry, where we love to host God's presence and pursue revival. And this is our Sunday morning video. If this is the first time watching, we also let you know that there are 2 services happening every Sunday at our church. And if you have not attended one yet, we want to invite you to join us either 9 o'clock or 11 o'clock. And you can just WhatsApp this number. Let us know that you'd like to come. Book your seat because space is limited. And then we'll make sure that there is enough space for you to attend one of the 2 services. And we want to really invite you to come and just be a part of what's happening here at the Oasis Revival Ministry. We had a 2-week break, or basically a 1-week break, where we got to spend a little bit of time with our family, and we are energized and ready for this next season. We're also preparing for our kids to go back to school in the next 2 weeks or so. And we're really looking forward to just getting into this next term. And I just feel like I've come back with excitement for the rest of the year. And I know that God is going to establish us in the right things. And He's going to bless you as we continue to build and plant this year, as we continue to overcome, and as we continue to trust God for His promises to manifest in our lives, as we believe Him and trust in Him and trust in His Word. So I just want to encourage you with this message this morning. It's really a message about faith, and it's a message about the fact that God will never leave you and He will always provide for you. And so if I can leave you with one statement that you can remember, there's going to be a lot, but this is the first one. It comes from Romans 10 verse 11, and it says, "No man who believes in Him will ever be put to shame or disappointed. He generously bestows His riches upon all who call upon Him." But listen to this. No man who believes in Him will ever be put to shame or disappointed. And I'm so encouraged in this last while. I've just got a testimony to share with you. We've got someone in our church who is involved in the restaurant industry, who couldn't pay their rent, who was in the process of being kicked out or asked to leave or evicted or whatever you want to call it, whether it's legal or not. They were asked to leave their flat, and we just prayed over them and asked God to restore the joy in their household. And he came the next week to testify that the owner of the flat next door approached him and said, "Won't you stay in our flat, regardless of if you can pay or not in this time? We just need some tenants in there." And so he came just to testify that God had heard him, answered him, and not allowed him to be put to shame. I think that's just such an exciting testimony. And that's really what God is doing for us. It doesn't matter what you are going through, if you believe God, and if your behavior, and hear this carefully, because faith equals action. So if your behavior shows that you believe God, in other words, you believe Him in spirit and in truth, and there is action on that, then you will never, ever, ever be put to shame. And so I just was reading, and I shared the sermon a while ago. I was reading about Hannah, and she was praying for a son, and God gave her Samuel. But she said these words. She said, "God, if you give me a son, I will dedicate him to you." And as I read that, God just said to me, He said, "Whatever is dedicated to the Lord will have great influence." Whatever is dedicated to the Lord will have great influence. And what I want to challenge you with today, or tell you today, or encourage you with today, is the fact that by faith, if you believe, you can reshape your future, and you will not be put to shame because you have dedicated your life to God. And what does it mean to dedicate your life to God? Well, it means that you ask Him what He can do with your life, with your finances, with your children, with your company, with your business, with your church, with your school, with every activity you're involved in. You're constantly taking that to God, and you're saying, "God, how can I be of great help to you. Remember, God says, even if you've done this for the least of them, you've done it for me. So God, how can I have great influence? And an easy way to ask that is, God, what are the open doors you are providing me with? I was on, we were away, and I looked around where we were, and God was saying, these are open doors. Not because these doors are going to take you higher, but because these are places, or this is a place where you can serve. This is a place where you can love. This is a place where you can bring favor, God's favor. And so an open door, and many people ask, God, give me an open door, and they imagine that God takes them up, up a rank, or gives them a promotion, or takes them to the next place. But an open door means God will give you a greater place to serve. That's if you've served well in your current place. So when we ask for open doors, what we're actually asking for is, God, show us, give us eyes and ears to see where our hands and feet can have the greatest influence. And I think a lot of the world is divided because the world's not asking, where can I be of influence? The world is asking, what can you give me? And so that intent of self-gratification and self-blessing and taking for myself creates barriers, creates division, because the world is constantly trying to protect the little it has. But God, when God is asking us, when we sacrifice our lives, and that's a heavy word, but when we dedicate our lives to Him, God's giving us more opportunity to give instead of more opportunity to take. So God demonstrates His love to you by giving in abundance. And what He's going to give you in abundance is more places to serve. And it's become one of my prayers this year is, God, teach me how to give. And teach me how to give in abundance, and teach me how to sow more of whatever it is. God, will you show me and give me the ability to give? And God gives friends who give and who show and demonstrate, and God has demonstrated to us how to give more. And so we're trusting Him. God, will you make us more giving? Will you give us more opportunity to bless? Will you give us more opportunity to pray into and love others and sow into their lives and see your kingdom come in more, in better and stronger ways? And so that's really what God does, and that's what He gives in abundance. So when we're asking God for an open door, we're asking God, how can we best serve our community? How can we best serve our church? How can we best serve our children? How can we best serve our friends and those around us? And as we ask those questions, God shows it to us. And so He starts to give us more and more and more and more opportunities to do that. And then the other important question to ask is this really an open door? So many people are pursuing relationships. If you think of networking in the corporate world or even in the church world, people are pursuing relationships to receive something. And really, those are closed doors. Unless God has said, this is a place where you can bless, this is a place where you can sow honor, this is a place where you can encourage others, it's not an open door. And I want to say this, he who believes is actually willing to give. I think that's the greatest test of faith. If you have faith, you're asking, how can I be effective? How can I have influence? How can I give? Faith doesn't mean I'm trusting and trusting and trusting and trusting and trusting and trusting and trusting, trusting and trusting to receive something, to get something, to get more, to grow bigger, for a better this, for a better that. That's not faith. Faith says, how can I become greater with regards to influence? How can I give more? How can I influence more? Where in the community can I serve better? And then God gives vision. And the vision He gives you will unlock keys in the community, will unlock keys in your workplace, will unlock keys in your children's school, will unlock keys in your own school if you're still a student, wherever you're asking God to use you, He will unlock those doors for you. And I think that's the biggest indicator. I remember as a 19-year-old, was playing drums on stage, and a worship leader walked off the stage and said, "Yeah, man, I play nicely with you, man. I enjoy playing with you. Don't you want to move to Cape Town?" And I went home, and I couldn't shake the idea of moving to Cape Town, completely on a voluntary basis. For 2 years, I said yes to that call because I felt that I could give something. I felt that I could sow of my time. And so I went down, and I never expected the church that I was serving to pay me, to bless me, to give me food, to give me rent, you name it. I took it all upon myself to make sure that I was ready to serve week after week after week after week. And I ended up serving in the youth group, and I ended up, just being so busy. And I wasn't there to take anything. I was there to give of my life. And that opened up doors that are still open today, 20 years later. I'm still walking in the fruit of the doors that opened up 20 years ago because I was willing to give of my life. I want to encourage you in whatever place where you are right now, wherever you're serving, whether you're the CEO of a company or whether you open the door for guests or whatever it is, your place of service and your faithfulness and your ability to see more and serve more and will open up more doors for you. And so when we ask for greater position, we're asking for greater vision, for more ability to serve, for better ways to serve the community. And I'm trusting God for the best way to serve our community, our church body, our children's school, every area where our feet, that's why God says, wherever your feet God will give you the nations that your feet tread on. I'm forgetting the right statement just off the top of my head there. But wherever you go, God will give you that land because you're willing to serve. And so that's what a believer is. A believer is someone who believes in God enough, who knows that whatever they set their hearts and their minds to, inspired by the Holy Spirit, they know that they will always have enough to serve, to bless, and to sow into the kingdom. And so I'm encouraged by that. I'm busy growing with that promise of God that we will never be put to shame because we believe. And then in Romans 12, it says, make a decisive decision. And I think if you look at the world today, and the difference between believers and those who are in the world is that believers are able to make decisive decisions because they're fueled by the Holy Spirit. Where the world flounders around trying to find the most comfortable place to exist and never really existing on anything. It's well known that if you don't have a good vision and you don't have a good calling, you're really going to stand for anything. And so the world is filled with all of these, pseudo-moral goals and victories and things that they're pursuing and not really achieving anything and lurching from crisis to crisis and defending whatever they're finding to defend. Where in reality as believers, God gives us a brand new identity that we don't even have to defend between race. In the church, we don't see race. We don't see black or white. If you're a believer, you're not seeing black or white or race or African or Chinese or Korean or American. You're seeing children of God, child of Christ, with the mind of Christ. And so when we open our doors on Sunday, whoever walks into the building is part of our family, is part of a group of believers. And these group of believers are moving and spreading around the world. And there is a sound of unity that fills the earth because we're believers. Do you see how it just transforms the way we think and it transforms the way we act because we're so willing to serve each other, knowing that we're filled with the mind of Christ. And so Romans 12 goes on to say, do not be conformed to the ways of the world. A believer doesn't conform, a believer transforms the world. And so if you read in Exodus 35, Moses gathers the entire nation together. He gathers the Israelites together. He calls them together and he says, we're going to build a sanctuary. And I just want to read this and make this, or just go through this. Moses, in Exodus 35, Moses gathered all the congregation of the Israelites. And he said to them, these are the commandments of the Lord which you are to do. And then he goes on to explain that they're going to take an offering for the Lord. And he says this, whoever is of a willing and a generous heart, let him bring the Lord's offering. And there's something that they understood to do in that moment. They understood that they were going to live from the presence of God, not to the presence of God. And I think we get confused there sometimes. We're trying to find God and we're not fully living out of the presence of God because we're always looking for the presence of God. And I think when you host God's presence and when God's presence fills your house, you will find yourself living from the presence of God, and you will find that your heart will be naturally transformed to become more generous because you are living from God's fullness. You have so much to give. Let me give you an example. If I talk about the one thing that married people are looking for, they'll say they're looking for love. But actually, in God's presence, we live from a place of love towards each other. We then have tools that are given to live and have a marriage. And out of a marriage flows fellowship. So love is actually the thing that God gives us as a source. And we live out of that love and we have a great marriage. And out of the marriage we receive fellowship. And we're accepted by each other. And there's great joy in the house. And so that's really an example of practically what it means to live from God's presence. And so they had to build the tabernacle so that God's presence would visibly dwell amongst them and would be a symbol of his presence amongst them. And so he was calling everyone. Now notice this, it was everyone, whoever is of a willing and a generous heart, let him bring the Lord's offering. And that's who God is calling. Believers are those who are willing and of a generous heart. And I want to say to the church right now, rise up in your generosity. Don't walk into the church and fold your arms and refuse to get involved or refuse to sow or bless or give. This isn't a financial message, but oftentimes our attitude towards the church and finances shows us the attitude of our heart. It reveals whether we are generous or not. And God's calling those who are generous. And then as you read through Exodus 35, I just highlighted it. It goes on, it says, let every able and wise-hearted man among you come. And they came, each one whose heart had been stirred up and whose spirit was made willing. And they came, both men and women, all who were willing-hearted. Verse 29, verse 25, and all the women who had ability and were wise-hearted. And verse 26, and all the women who had ability and whose hearts were stirred up. And verse 29, they brought a free will offering, whose hearts were willing. And God moved them to bring anything for any of the work which the Lord had gave them. And so it goes up until the point where eventually they said, stop. There is too much. God's people have brought too much for God's temple. Wow. Like, God says he will give generously and supply. In other words, he will give you enough faith and generosity to such a point that you will come to a place in your life where there is too much. A friend of mine, their church, in this lockdown period, received 10 tons of meat to give out. How do you give out 10 tons of meat? You phone your friends, you say, come and gather. We gathered some of it. We put it in a freezer. I still haven't been able to give all of it out because there is too much. So that's what it looks like in a time of crisis. Or when there is an opportunity to be generous, those who are willing have more than enough to give. And you find yourself actually with the challenge of how can we use everything that has been given. So this is a renewed mind. When you are given the opportunity, or when you dedicate your life to God, you're going to find that you have too much to give instead of too little to give. All right. And part of this renewed mind is the fact that we operate from God's presence, not for God's presence. All right. And then we are not conformed to the world. We transform the world. And in transforming the world, we become able and willing instead of reluctant and withholding. And then further on in Romans 12, it actually says, rate yourself according to the faith that God has given. What does the world do? The world rates itself according to others. And so it rejects other nations, and it rejects other races, and it rejects other people because they're not good enough. But what God is saying in this time is rate yourself according. Look at your own life. Please don't look at the lives of others. Look at yourself. Look at how much you have to give. Do you have what it takes to step into the open door that God is giving you? And then it says, never ever lag in zeal. This is all in Romans 12. And that's literally what the Israelites did not do. They did. Those who were willing and those who were generous did not lag in their zeal. They were so zealous and eager to have an influence and to build up God's presence in that place that they gave more than enough. And so I want to leave you with three statements about faith. And I want to declare this about faith. Faith asks, what can I give? Faith doesn't ask, what can I get? Faith asks, where can I give? Faith doesn't ask, from whom will I get? Faith asks, how much can I give? Faith doesn't ask, how much will I get? And I want to leave you with those three thoughts, that if you're grounded in God's presence and you know that God gives more than abundantly, and you know that those who believe will never, ever, ever be put to shame, then it's going to renew your mind and transform the way you think about faith. Think about Abraham, and when he moved in faith, he didn't go into the land to receive all the livestock and to receive the land. And God used him to transform not only the land of Canaan where he moved into, but Abraham has transformed the entire world, because by faith we are all children of God and children of Abraham. And so we're asking three things. In faith we're saying, God, where can I give? How much can I give? And who can I give to? And God, will you supply more than abundantly to meet my needs and to meet the doors, the open doors and the opportunities that you have given us. I want to bless you with that today. Last Sunday we had KG preach in church. I nearly said in shirt. We had KG preach in church and he did such a great job just of declaring and speaking about the fact that God called Moses and God called him for the season, and he had to believe that God would back him and give him everything he needs. And it just set the tone. We were literally in tears joining in on Skype. Such an honor to have people like that in our church, and we're going to get him together for a chat. And then I want to invite you. We're in the next week we're going to be recording a discussion just around this sermon. Bernadine and I are going to get together, have a chat, and talk about how faith influences our lives. And I want to invite you to look out for that this coming Thursday. So if you would like to support this ministry, please go to www.revivalministry.co.za/give. Our banking details and the pay fast option are there, and you're welcome to support us with your finances that way. You can also support us by sharing this video if you know of someone who really just need some encouragement, share this video with them, and in that way you spread the word and you spread what God is doing. I just want to bless you. Father, will you bless every person watching? Will you show them that there is more than enough, and that the doors that you're opening up will be doors of influence, doors of blessing, and great doors of faith. And so I declare that over every person watching. Remember to WhatsApp us and connect with us, and we look forward to seeing you guys next Sunday. Be blessed.
You fill us up with water that